Can your subconscious mind kill people? Let's find out. I'm Mike Siegel, I write for Ordinary Times, and this is The Throughput. So the subject of today's video is going to be the 1956 classic sci-fi film Forbidden Planet. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be launching a Twitter thread on my feed that's going to go for a few months where I'll go one by one through the episodes of the original Star Trek series and talk about what I think about them. And occasionally, maybe every month or two, put a video on here talking about some of the scientific aspects. Now, you may be wondering what those have to do with each other. The connection here is that Gene Roddenberry cited Forbidden Planet as one of the influences on Star Trek. But I think a more accurate description is that they took as many elements as they could from Forbidden Planet without getting sued. Forbidden Planet probably seems very cliche to a modern audience, but it was revolutionary in its day. It was the first movie to show humans traveling faster than light. It was the first to be set entirely on an alien world, and the first to have a sophisticated robot that could interact with human beings. All of those elements, apart from the robot, would eventually show up in Star Trek. You can also see things like a militarized space exploration force, journeys to stars that actually exist, powerful ancient devices left by extinct aliens, mental powers, moral conflicts, beautiful intelligent women in futuristic outfits, a captain who is famous for his success with the ladies, and a very strong Shakespearean influence. And it's more than that, really. It's just the feel and the cadence and the rhythms of the movie remind you very powerfully of Star Trek, even down to the set design. If you overdub the dialogue to mention the Federation and told me this was a Star Trek prequel, I'd absolutely believe you. And so any discussion of Star Trek, in my opinion, has to start with the urtext of the Forbidden Planet. And its influence is not just felt by Star Trek. Almost all of the science fiction in the last 65 years has felt the influence of Forbidden Planet. Doctor Who, Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, especially Babylon 5. They all followed in that trail and have taken elements from it. Now, I'll talk about my opinion of the film, obviously, but I'm also going to talk about the science. What about the science of Forbidden Planet? Is it accurate? Was it accurate for its day? Let's dig in. Before we get started, just as a warning, I'm going to discuss key elements of the plot of this movie. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead, pause me, check it out, come back. I'll wait.
In the final decade of the 21st century, men and women in rocket ships landed on the moon. By 2200 AD, they had reached the other planets of our solar system. Almost at once, there followed the discovery of hyperdrive, through which the speed of light was first attained and later greatly surpassed. And so at last, mankind began the conquest and colonization of deep space. United Planets cruiser C-57D, now more than a year out from Earth base on a special mission to the planetary system of the great main sequence star, Altair.
So, a few interesting things in the first few seconds of this movie. In this future, humans didn't land on the moon until the 21st century, which actually turned out to be absurdly pessimistic. It was only 13 years after this that we did land on the moon. Now, I've talked about faster than light travel before. What they use in here is a concept of hyperspace. That is an external dimension of space that you can travel in, that allows you to exceed the speed of light, sort of pop out of one part of the universe, go into hyperspace, pop back into, and therefore not necessarily violate relativity. I'll talk about that probably more in depth in another video. But what's really cool here is they're going to the star Altair, which they describe as a great main sequence star. That's good science. Altair is an actual star. It is in the constellation of Aquila, and its name comes from the Arabic for flying eagle. It's about 1.8 times the mass of the sun and is indeed on the main sequence, that long adult period of a star's life where it is burning hydrogen into helium, much like our sun. Altair is about 17 light years away. In 1956, this meant it was one of the closer stars to the solar system. And so as human beings expand out into space, it would be naturally one of the ones we would try to colonize. We haven't detected any planets around Altair. That doesn't mean they don't exist. We just may not be able to detect them for various reasons. But if there were a planet around Altair, and the distance between that planet and Altair were 3 times the distance between Earth and its sun, that planet could have liquid water and therefore be habitable. So very realistic part of the movie here.
We're down to point 3896 of light speed.
Warm in here, Skipper.
Yeah.
Now, in a modern film, the approach to the planet would be done by computers. But I do want to draw attention to this object in the center of the ship. It's kind of like a celestial sphere. We use real-life versions of these when we're teaching intro astronomy or observational astronomy. The idea is that you basically recreate the Greek model of the universe, where the Earth is at the center, and you have this giant sphere that envelops it, and the stars are embedded in that. That's obviously not the way the universe is, but it's a very good way of intellectualizing how things move in space, how the planets move, how the sun moves, where things are located with respect to each other, and be able to orient yourself in this spherical, three-dimensional space so that you know where things are. In this case, the spaceship is at the center of the celestial sphere. Now, of course, nowadays you wouldn't have an analog device like this, you'd have something digital. But it's a really nice touch to show that this is really how you would visualize a solar system, how you would visualize the progress of your spaceship, how you would visualize the orientation of the star and the planets and the spaceship. So very nice touch here.
Jerry, you... There's Altair right on the nose, Skipper.
Now there is an error here. They show Altair as red. Altair is not red. It is hotter than the sun, so it's actually kind of bluish white color. Also, this was not known at the time, so I'm not going to deduct points for it, but Altair spins on its axis very rapidly, and we've actually been able to measure that the star is kind of squished down a little bit oblate because of that rapid rotation. So it would look a little bit different from what they show in the movie here.
Dr. Morbius, I require landing coordinates.
Very well, but I wash my hands of all responsibility. You have standard charts?
Yes, sir.
You may come in at 83, 17, 4 north, 148, 21 west.
This is actually a little bit of a nice touch. They give coordinates. One of the things that kind of is annoying is where you come to an alien planet and you land just where this alien civilization or human beings are. Planets are huge, so you actually need coordinates, and they give accurate longitude and latitude coordinates. One thing that's a little bit off, though, for a longitude to be useful, you'd have to have a prime meridian. You may remember from my Master and Commander video, I talked about how longitude is measured with respect to a prime meridian. That's not a geographical feature. It's an arbitrary feature created by human beings, so they'd have to know that reference point. But other than that, pretty accurate.
You are a robot, aren't you?
That is correct, sir. For your convenience, I am monitored to respond to the name Robbie.
I haven't talked about robots on this channel before. Nowadays, of course, we have lots of robots. Most of them are highly specialized to assemble cars or assist with surgery or run around your house picking up dirt. But we have yet to invent a generalized robot like this, but I don't think anyone doubts that such devices will be coming. Certainly seems a lot more realistic in 2021 than it would have in 1956.
If you gentlemen will go in, you're expected.
Now, I'm not sure if this was intended, but it looks to me like the residence here is a converted spaceship. If you were actually going into deep space and you weren't planning on returning to Earth, it would probably make a lot of sense to land your ship and then convert it into a residence. Why waste that material leaving it in orbit when you could have everything you need on the surface of the planet? So again, I don't know if that's what they intended to do, but it kind of looks that way to me, so I'll count it as a nice touch.
Pointed at the commander. Aim right between the eyes. Fire. You see, he's helpless, locked in a sub-electronic dilemma between my direct orders and his basic inhibitions against harming rational beings.
This is another really good touch. What's being illustrated here are Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. He came up with them in 1942, and they have guided a huge amount of thinking about AI and robotics, not just in science fiction, but in science fact. The 3 laws are: a robot shall not harm a human being or through inaction allow a human being to be harmed. A robot shall obey all instructions given to it by a human being, except where it conflicts with the first law. And a robot shall protect its own existence, except where it conflicts with the first and second law. As we get further into AI and computers, we're going to have to think more and more about the morality of robots. And so Isaac Asimov laid the basics, and it's nice to see a tribute to that. I don't know if it was directly intended, but it's nice to see that showing up in this film, showing again the kind of thought that goes into constructing this kind of a powerful robot.
Tell me just what is involved in your making contact with Earth base?
Well, fundamentally, it's a question of crude power.
No.
How to short-circuit the continuum on a 5 or 6 parsec level. Of course, a transmitter of that sort isn't exactly standard equipment.
No.
To build one, we'd have to cannibalize about 2/3 of the ship's electronic gear, and then unship the main drive to juice it. Just to construct a bunker to house the core would take about 10 days.
Putting aside the science of faster-than-light communication, notice several things here. First of all, he says they have to communicate 5 to 6 parsecs. That is the distance to Altair. Altair is exactly 5.2 parsecs away. So they do a much better job than George Lucas did with Star Wars on getting parsecs right. Notice another thing. He talks a lot about the huge amount of power they're going to need to send a signal to Earth. This is also a really nice touch. One of the things that we worry about sometimes is interstellar communication and the power requirements. There are plans on the drawing board to send spaceships, little tiny spaceships, to, say, Alpha Centauri within a human lifetime, using lasers and solar sails and so forth. But one of the dilemmas that they are facing is, how does that probe communicate information back to Earth? You would need a tremendous amount of power, but the more power means a bigger ship, which means it's going to be slower. So I really like this, that they have to tear apart the ship to get the power to be able to communicate back to Earth. It's something that a lot of science fiction movies just take for granted, that you can have instant communication with Earth, but they actually invested some thought into how you would have to do that. So really cool.
It's nothing really personal, just a kiss.
But why should people want to kiss each other?
Well, it's an old custom. All of the really high civilizations go in for it.
But it's so silly.
But it's good for you, though. It stimulates the whole system. As a matter of fact, you can't be in tip-top health without it.
Really? I didn't know that.
I'd be only too happy to show you.
Well, thank you very much, Lieutenant.
No trouble at all.
Is that all there is to it?
Putting aside the creep factor here and the ensuing somewhat cringy confrontation with the captain, there's a lot of debate among anthropologists about whether romantic kissing is something that is instinctive or something that is learned. And the movie is throwing its weight behind the idea that it is learned. And this is something that has shown up in science fiction, with the idea that isolated human cultures or people who are just becoming human might not understand the whole concept of kissing. It showed up in a Star Trek episode by any other name as well. So interesting here, even if it's done in a kind of un-PC way.
In times long past, this planet was the home of a mighty and noble race of beings, which called themselves the Krell. Ethically, as well as technologically, they were 1,000,000 years ahead of humankind.
So now we're finally getting to the plot. The idea is that 200,000 years ago, a race of super beings inhabited the planet, that had evolved 1,000,000 years before human beings. I like this idea in principle. The cosmos is on a vast scale, and there's no reason that human beings and other aliens would evolve and at the same time and at the same pace. Alien beings are just as likely to be millions of years behind us or millions of years ahead of us as they are to be on the same scale. So this is a really cool idea, and it's been plumbed very well by science fiction since. The only problem with this is that Altair itself. Altair is only 1.2 billion years old. It's a much bigger star than the sun, and it's not going to last as long. At 1.2 billion years, life on Earth had just developed photosynthesis. It would be another 2 billion years before multicellular life came on. Now, I'm not saying that evolution has to go at the same pace on every planet. One of the things we've learned as we've discovered other planets in our universe is that the solar system is not really a model for how solar systems work. So there's no reason to believe that Earth is necessarily the model of how evolution would go. But I find it kind of hard to believe that Earth was that slow to develop intelligent life, but it's worth keeping in mind. So I'm not going to duck points for that, but it is an interesting point that this solar system is very young, and we generally don't look for alien civilizations in such young planets.
You're able to read this?
A little, it's my profession. 20 years ago, I began here with this page of geometrical theorems. Eventually, I was able to deduce most of their huge logical alphabet. I began to learn. The first practical result was that robot of mine, which you gentlemen appear to find so remarkable.
So this is another really great touch and something that a lot of science fiction movies don't do. Mobius is a philologist. That means he's someone who specializes in language. And one of the things I love here is that it takes him years and years of work, an enormous effort, to even begin to figure out this alien language. For TV conventions, most aliens speak English, or you have a universal translator that converts their languages to English. But there's absolutely no reason to believe that an alien language would correspond word for word or concept for concept to human language. It might be completely different, not just in terms of vocabulary and grammar, but in terms of how the language is conceptualized. So I really like the idea that they're going for here, that this alien language is so difficult and so different that it's taken a professional philologist with an immense IQ 20 years to understand it. So we've now reached the part of the film where Mobius is showing him this enormous alien machine that the Krell constructed. Note here, this shot about an hour into the movie is almost exactly the same as the shot in Babylon 5 when they discover a similar great machine in Epsilon Eridani. The idea of a vast machine that is 20 miles by 20 miles, that is so enormous and is such a giant computer, sounds fantastic, and certainly must have sounded fantastic in 1956. But think about this. Our comparatively primitive civilization has 2 billion computers on the surface of the planet. And with enough capacity to store all of human knowledge, enormous numbers of movies, music, and pictures of naked art. And so this doesn't sound insane to me. If you took our internet and compacted it all into one area, it would fill an area 40 miles by 40 miles across. It would be as big as this great machine that the aliens constructed. The thinking of the authors was affected by their experience of computers, which was things like UNIVAC, which were the size of buildings. And this was before the microminiaturization revolution. This was before the personal computer revolution. Nowadays, if you had an enormous computer like this, it would be distributed. You would be talking about networks and so forth. But the idea of the Krell machine is not crazy. This is basically, this, at least in terms of computing power, what human beings have now. Now, there is, as we'll get into, technology that's way beyond us. But this doesn't seem that unrealistic. Really nice.
$480 pints, as you requested. Total, 60 gallons.
Genuine Kansas City bourbon.
So the idea here is that Robbie, if you put anything into his little chest plate, that he can break it down molecular structure and then recreate whatever you want. And in this case, the cook gave him a thing of whiskey and he recreated a whole bunch of whiskey for him. Again, you'll notice the connection to Star Trek, that this is basically the replicator that they have on that show. This is probably one of the bigger flights of fancy. There's a reason we make bourbon the way we do. There's a reason we blow glass the way we do. There's a reason we cook things the way we do. And that is because it is efficient. Taking individual carbon and nitrogen and oxygen molecules and assembling them into a molecule of whiskey and so forth, that would be incredibly energy and computationally intensive. I suppose if you have limitless power like they do on this planet, you could do it, but there's a reason we do things the way we do. And just analyzing things by chemical structure and recreating them is not as easy as just creating them in the first place.
Is that it? Tried to make a plaster model from the footprints we found. 37 inches by 19. It's fantastic. Doc, I don't understand. Whatever walks on this would be quite an opponent for a man with a club, but with our kind of weapons, Quinn could have knocked this right. No, Skipper. This thing runs counter to every known law of adaptive evolution. What do you mean? Well, notice this structure here. characteristic of a four-footed animal. Yet our visitor last night left the tracks of a biped. Primarily a ground animal, too. Yet this claw could only belong to an arboreal creature, like some impossible tree sloth. Just doesn't fit into normal nature. Anywhere in the galaxy, this is a nightmare.
So I can't speak to the accuracy of their animal physiology here, but this is one of the things I really like about this movie, and one of the things that it carried over into Star Trek and that I really loved about Star Trek. When they are confronted with an unexpected phenomenon, in this case, an invisible alien creature attacked them in the night, and they fired their powerful weapons at it and couldn't even stop it. They tried to figure out what it is. In this case, he took a cast of the footprint it left and is trying to figure out what kind of creature it is and therefore what weaknesses it might have. This is one of the beautiful things about Star Trek, one of the beautiful things about this movie, and one of the beautiful things about really well-written science fiction, where people try to figure out unexplained phenomena rather than pretending the phenomena don't exist or saying you imagine things or we had psychosis or something like that. They try to figure it out. This is a really great scene, and even though they are missing critical information here that would tell them what these invisible creatures are about, the fact that they're trying to figure it out this way is a really great touch and a really great thing in this movie, and something that carried over into the next 65 years of science fiction.
Easy, Doc. Morbius was too close to the problem. The Krell had completed the project. Big machine. No instrumentalities. True creation. Come on, Doc. Let's have it. But the Krell forgot one thing. Yes, what? Monsters, John. Monsters from the id. Id? What's that? Doc.
So this is where we get the finale of the plot. So it turns out the creatures that attacked the crew and the creatures that killed the crew of the original ship that landed on this planet were from Morbius's subconscious. The alien machine was able to create things out of pure thought. And when Morbius connected his mind to it, what it did was it not only harvested his conscious thoughts, but his subconscious thoughts. All of the things that are buried down, his resentment, his anger, everything, and it made that into manifest physical form. Creatures that attacked the crew of this ship, creatures that attacked the crew of the Bellerophon. And that was why the aliens themselves were destroyed. In their hubris, they forgot that being able to turn thought into reality meant bringing in all those subconscious thoughts, all those bad influences, all those bad impulses, and their civilization was destroyed overnight. I really like this idea. Basically, every evil urge they had could come into roaring into reality, and that destroyed them, and that is what is attacking the crew. If you accept this idea of an all-powerful alien technology that can turn thought into reality, this really is an amazingly thoughtful thing and really influential over that. One of the themes that runs through literary history and certainly through science fiction is what happens when flawed human beings get godlike powers. And we know that our subconscious minds are dangerous. Some of us have, intrusive thoughts that we don't like. We have impulses that we bury down. When you dream, you sometimes have strange and even dangerous thoughts that from your subconscious. Ultimately, this is a story of what happens when technological prowess races ahead of morality, a lesson that has been very germane to the 20th and 21st centuries. And I really like the idea that destruction was unleashed here, not by malice, but by the unintentional misuse of technology, because they didn't understand what they were doing when they unleashed the mind like this. We are animals, and the Krell presumably were also animals. We have a veneer of culture and civilization over our animal nature, but history is replete with sophisticated, cultured humans reverting to savagery. Seeing a 1956 film that was made under the Hays Code hit this theme so hard is quite remarkable. And again, one of the influences it has had over the last half century of science fiction.
Yes, Alta. Your father, my shipmates, all the stored knowledge of the Krell. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Morbius, to keep the alien technology from falling into more human hands, destroys the planet. He sets the 9,000 thermonuclear reactors that power it to overload and destroy, and tells the ship to get 100 million miles away for their safe. Thermonuclear reactors wouldn't destroy a planet, and you probably wouldn't have to get that far away, even with 9,000 of them. It would create a pretty big explosion, though. One little touch here, the explosion should reach them about 8 minutes after it actually happened, so hopefully they included that in their countdown. Otherwise, they'd be sitting there saying, what happened? Why haven't we seen? Oh, yeah, the time delay. Because it takes like 8 minutes to travel that 100 million miles. So really, there's not a lot to complain about in this film. Yes, it does have flights of fancy. Ancient aliens, faster than light travel, a machine that can create reality from people's thoughts. That's all fantastic technology. I'm not going to get into it. But the reason it works so well and the reason it was so influential is because it grounds things in real science. Altair is a real star. The dilemmas and conflicts that they face on reaching that star, communicating back to Earth, discovering what's going on, those are real, and they respond to it in realistic ways. It deals with medical and physical concepts in an intelligent and engaging way. It talks about psychology and sociology and things like that. Where it ventures into actual science, it's actually okay. When it talks about real science, it gets it right. They did their homework when they set up for this movie. And I think one of the things that makes a fantastic imaginative movie like this work is having that grounding in real science and real technology that allows you to then make those flights of fancy. Now, there are some aspects of it that have not held up terribly well, particularly its attitude on gender. If it were made today, they'd have a mixed gender crew, and you wouldn't have that kind of cringy talk between the captain and Altera, where he remonstrates with her for wearing skimpy outfits around his male crew and so forth. But overall, if you liked Star Trek, you'll like this movie. It really is very similar. It was a profound influence. It's almost really like a prequel to the series in the way it addresses things, the way it talks about things, in the rhythms, in the set design, in everything. And so I really enjoyed talking about this to launch my discussions of Star Trek, and hopefully we'll get a chance to reference it again as we go through the Star Trek series. Next 2 weeks are Christmas and New Year's. I probably won't put up a video unless some science news breaks, but I will use that chance to work on a really big video that I will probably actually have to break into 2 parts, looking at the preliminary script. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I'm Mike Siegel. I write for Ordinary Times. Have a happy holidays and enjoy movies and enjoy science.